All right. It's time, Mark, for dispute resolution. How do we resolve these? Section 16. Um, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so this is going to tie back to one of the prior sections that we talked about where I'm holding earnest money deposit. There's some sort of dispute, demand over who thinks they're right or wrong, and this just kind of lays out the process. So, unresolved controversies, claims, or other matters in question between the buyer and the seller arising out of or relating to the contract or its breach. Here's how it gets settled. A. Buyer and seller will have 10 days after conflicting demands for the deposit are made. Usually, phone call to me, email to me, or closing company. Whichever one sends their demand last becomes the 10 days. Now, in the real world, nobody gets together in 10 days and talks about it, so it's almost pointless, but they came up with this. So they have 10 days essentially to voluntarily try to resolve it on their own. And
Right.
when I say they, usually it's the agents, non income producing work, going back and forth. Hey, will you take this? Will you do that? You hear all the stories. And if that doesn't work, buyer and seller shall attempt to settle the dispute in amicable manner through mediation. Now, mediation is not arbitration. Mediation, again, is another voluntary, non binding process. So ultimately, the buyer and the seller are going to find and or appoint a mediator. Usually you call your local courts, clerk of courts. They have mediators on rotation there. I don't know what the going rate is for mediators, probably a couple $100. What you're going to do is each side is going to plead their case to a mediator. The mediator is going to attempt to point out the good and the bad in each of the stories and say, looks like both people have issues here, so you probably want to resolve it voluntarily and compromise. So they're nothing more than somebody trying to get the parties to voluntarily agree.
There we go. Now, if mediation doesn't work, then where does it go?
So the contracts are going to differ. Disputes not settled pursuant to paragraph 16 may be resolved by instituting action in the appropriate court. So this one is essentially saying if you can't do it voluntarily or through mediation, then the closing company is going to have to interplead the funds into the clerk of court, and it's a lawsuit and very expensive.
All right. So there you go. Best route is come to an agreement. And most people, wouldn't you say most people do that?
I think time cures most of it. Everybody's a little emotionally charged at first, and then as time goes by, it seems that there's compromises.
So here's my challenge to you as the agent. A friend of mine once said, when you come upon a fire, look down. In one hand, you have a bucket full of water, and a other hand is a bucket full of gasoline. You get to decide what you throw on it. Your job is not to grouse about the other side, the other agent, because you can be throwing gasoline on a fire saying, hey, these things happen. You always stay on the high level. You always stay professional. Don't let your personal feelings factor in here, because a lot of times things go sideways because the agents were getting into a spitting match or some other kind of match, and it just devolves from there.
I call it non-income producing time. You
Yeah.
want to eliminate that as much as possible.
There you go. All right. So there you have section 16. Come back for section 17.